Welcome back, everyone. Class 3 of Lawfare's hacking course. For today's class, Sean is going to begin for maybe 5 minutes reviewing the material. I will then talk about permissions and root use, and then we'll switch over to Sean, who will show how to actually implement the whole permission stuff on the command line. And then switch back to me. I'll talk about hashing and password cracking. And then Sean will actually crack some passwords for us using John the Ripper. Anyway, it's going to be a lot of fun because this is going to be, I was saying to Sean yesterday that if you don't like password cracking, then this may not be the course for you. I'm so juvenile. I love cracking passwords, even the ones that even when I know the password. Okay, Sean, take it away.
Cool. So thank you, everyone, for coming back after our little break there. Just a quick refresher about what we did both in the course and the homework. We did some basic command line manipulation of files, moving them, removing them, renaming them, which is the same as moving in the command line. And also some more navigation of the file system and even a little bit of editing, just to show you like sort of basic editing of a text file. Those skills are going to be really important today and then going forward. And we're going to try to reinforce those as we show you more hacks. The other thing we did, of course, was the keylogger. I will have updated instructions for that on the GitHub along with the password cracking we do today after the class. And then please don't destroy your system like I did last time around. Okay, so if you saw that video, that is a warning tale. It is not something you should do. All right, now let's get started here with there are 3 errors I just wanted to highlight that we're getting some emails about, and some of them we've been able to help folks, and I just wanted to go over them. So the first thing is I want to reinforce the network adapter setting in VirtualBox. This is VirtualBox. Basically, if you go to your VirtualBox virtual machine, highlight it, and then go into the settings, which is the gear here. It's grayed out in this screenshot, but it would be yellow normally or some sort of orangey thing. And then you go down to network. Then in network, make sure you have the checkbox enable network adapter checked, and then attached to should be bridged adapter. Now, if for some reason, when you boot the machine after doing this, you still are not able to use your networking, aka you can't get on the internet, then you can go back in here and change this setting to NAT, N-A-T, Network Address Translation. That's much less safe, but this is a virtual machine after all, so it's not that big of a deal. It would be a pretty big problem if it were happening on your system. And we'll talk through some of that when we go over networking, but for right now, you can keep that setting. All right, the second thing, and I'll actually make my display a little larger for this one. This is Kali. I've booted into Kali. I've gone into my settings here. I've gone into display, and then I've changed the display resolution. A number of folks are saying when they get into Kali, they can't read the text. It's teeny tiny. There's some font errors and so on, or some font issues. Between this display setting and the appearance setting, which is up here, it looks like a swatch of colors. Between those two, you should be able to figure out, make it legible on your system. Some of these high, like Retina displays, for whatever reason, when you get into Kali, it really makes the displays tiny. So if you can try that, that'd be great. And if you're still having issues, I'm glad you got to this point. At least you're in the machine and it boots, and we'll try to solve them for you. Okay, and the last thing here, some folks have asked how to download the Git repository materials, download the whole thing. I don't necessarily recommend this because we're uploading videos and some of them are, relatively large. But if you want to do this, you can go to the green button here, code. It's a drop down and you go download zip. It'll zip everything. Now, that will only zip, the entire set of things. You can't go like drill down into an individual folder and just zip that folder. And somebody had asked, well, with the homework, it's kind of hard to read on GitHub, or, I have some issues with it. We've uploaded versions for each of the homeworks of like 5 different file types here. So we've got PDF, Microsoft Word, DocX, LibreOffice format, and then HTML web page, right? Between these, especially PDF, I would say PDF is probably your safest. You should be able to read the homework if you're having some kind of issue with legibility, or GitHub is just not really your thing. Okay, and with that, I will toss it back to you, Scott.
I'm really excited about today because it's such a kind of interesting relationship between operating systems and legal systems, and there's a lot of interesting jurisprudential connections. And so what I did was, the law school IT was great. That we bought this great new technology. It's much better than screen sharing. Like the iPads. You can. Well, this is like the new thing. It's called Yellow Pad, and it's unbelievably high resolution. I mean, I don't know. Can you see it? I mean, it's so high resolution. This is e-paper, and the stylus. It works really great. I hope you'll like it. Okay, so let's using this. I hope I don't drop it so it doesn't break. Recall that when I was talking about the kernel, I said that the kernel was a bit like a waiter. So these are the customers. This is my table. This is Sean's table. This is Ben's table, and we want the food from the kitchen, but we have to ask the kernel to go in and get it. We can go in it directly. Now, if I order my food, the kernel will go into the kitchen and bring it back. But if I, let's say, actually want Sean's food, what the kernel will look at its list of permissions and say, no, you can't get Sean's food. I can only get you your food, or I can maybe get Ben's food because you're here as a group. So the way in which operating systems control access over resources is through allocating permissions. Okay, so let me move to the next screen here. This has it's like 3D audio. I don't know if you can hear it, but it sounds like paper rustling. But anyway, okay. So how should we think about permissions? So how do permissions work? So let's take this book. Okay, I have the permission to read it. I have the permission to write in it. It's my book. There's a relationship between me and the book. Well, the same thing about permissions. There's a relationship between the user and the file. Okay, and so just like you can do different things with permissions in the real world, in Linux, you basically have 3 things you can do with a file. You can either read the data that's in it, you can write to the data, including deleting it, and executing it, assuming that it's code. You can't execute data, you can read and write it. Okay, so let's move to the next page. Okay, it's not only the case. It's not only the case that I'm sorry. Just like users have rights to their files, they also have powers. Namely, they can manipulate these rights, and this mainly happens for ordinary users through the creation of a file. If the user creates a file, then that user becomes the owner of that file. Okay, it's kind of like John Locke and the labor theory of value. You go out, you mix your labor with the object, you therefore own it, and you have certain permissions and rights and powers associated with it. First, you'll have full permissions for that file. So generally, you'll be able to read, write, or execute it. You can change that, but that'll be basically the default. And you also have the power to set permission for others. Okay, so when you do touch to create a file, or you go into nano to create a file, you become the owner of that file, and therefore you have not only the permissions to read, write, execute, but also the powers to change what those permissions are. Okay. Not only do you have permissions with respect to your own actions, but you can share. Okay, so over here, what I did was I created a little group called Teachers, and I put Scott and Sean in it, not Ben, because Ben is not teaching this, and so therefore should not interrupt. And so what happens is that for me, I can have read, write, execute privileges for the file, but I can also set privileges for the group. So I can say to whoever is in the teachers group, namely Scott and Sean, they can read and write to the file. Okay, they can read the file, they can write to the file, but I do not give anyone in the teachers group the permission to execute the code. And everyone else, like Ben, all they can do is read it. Now, I can change these. I can give everyone permission to read, write, execute. Teachers, everyone else, I can do that. But normally what you'll see is that the owner has the most privileges, then the groups will have generally less, and everyone else even fewer. Okay. Sean will show you how this works on the command line, but here's like a representation of the command line. You'll see associated with a file, you'll see this kind of string of letters and dashes, and they'll basically be after this dash here, which says it's a file. You'll have the permissions associated with the owner. So in this case, it would be me, read, write, execute. And then with respect to the group, read and write. And with respect to the world, just to write, just to read. Okay. And so Sean will show you how to do this. What's really cool about this technology, by the way, I don't have it down perfectly, but you can upload pictures to the pad. Okay. So this is a picture of King Charles, right? And this is when you switch to the root user, you become the sovereign. You become the sovereign of the operating system. Essentially, you have read, write, execute privileges for anything, or that you can change it to read, write, execute. And you do that using the su command, which Sean will show you how to do. The thing about root user is, as I said, the root is sovereign. The root can do whatever they want to do. Now, if the root user can do anything, then why don't we run as root? Well, we don't run as root because, as Lord Acton famously said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so what happens is that if you're going to operate as the root user, you're going to end up doing disastrous things because we all do disastrous things. The problem is that the operating system will listen to you and will do the crazy thing that you asked him to do, like what Sean did last 2 weeks ago by deleting his hard drive. He did that as. Did you do that as root, Sean? I don't remember if you did that as root, but like
I just used sudo for it.
You used it. I see. You used sudo. Okay, right. So the idea is that you don't want to run as root because that just gives you way too much power. You want to run at lower privileges so that you don't end up doing something that you're going to regret. And I know you're all going to do it because I did it too. And within 10 minutes, I completely destroyed my virtual machine, which is okay because it's a virtual machine, but it's not great. Sudo, as we've been emphasizing, is when you step into the root shoes temporarily. And that's why Carl Schmitt was right when he said the sovereign is he who decides on the exception, meaning as the user, if you have pseudo privileges, you are limited in what you're allowed to do. But if you invoke sudo, you all of a sudden become the sovereign. So what Schmitt was trying to say is you may not be running sudo, but you can run sudo. And since you can run sudo, you are always in the position of really being the sovereign. Not everyone has the right to run as sudo, and we'll talk about that probably next class. Okay, last point here before I pass this over to Sean. I said last week that the kernel operates with unlimited privileges. I also said that the root user runs with unlimited privileges. And so the question that students always have, and this because it's the most natural question, which is, wait, what's the difference between the kernel and the root user? Because they both operate with unlimited privileges. And the way I will put it is, let's go back to the dining room waiter example, where the kernel is the waiter. So the thing about root is a user. The thing about root is it still has to go through the kernel. It has to ask the kernel to do things for it. Because it's root, the kernel will do whatever the root asks it to do. But the root doesn't go into the kitchen. The kernel goes into the kitchen. So root can say, give me my food, but it also can say, give me Scott, Ben, and Sean's food. Okay, so the kernel is the one that does the running around. The root is the one who orders the kernel, so to speak, to do all the running around. Okay, I'm going to throw this back to Sean, who's going to show us how to implement this all on the command line.
Cool. Thank you for that, Scott. I'm not sure I can compete with that kind of tech, but I'll do my best. Oh, man. Raising the bar every week. Raising the bar. This is Kali. Hopefully you all, or at least most of you, have gotten into Kali. Again, we've got instructions for that on the GitHub. This is going to be really important going forward. You'll see the demo today. If you have Kali running, you can follow along with it. But if you don't, it's not on a typical, system. Certainly not on your Mac or something, or in the browser terminal. So password cracking, special things, special environment. There's a reason we made you go through those steps. Okay, let's talk permissions for a little bit. So first off, I'm in Kali. I'm in my terminal. I'm in my home folder. I'm Kali at Kali. So the machine's called Kali, which is confusing, but I am the Kali user. Okay. I'm also part of something called groups. I'm part of a group, for example, that's called Kali, and all these other groups for different privileges on the system. Okay, sudo being one of them. The users who are part of the group sudo, and there's a couple other settings that need to align, but if you're part of the group sudo, generally speaking, you have that sudo privilege. You can be root for a little while to run commands, and then you have to re-authenticate later if you try it again. Okay, let's take a look at our file system. So we're going to do ls, which you should be familiar with, and then -l, the option -l. And you'll see I made my font pretty big on this machine, so hold on. Let's try that again. Okay, that's much better. You'll see in the ls-l this list view that it shows a bunch of junk at the beginning. This is the permissions information that Scott was just talking about. This is sort of the low-level way where the file systems of these OSs sort of have at least a base level of security. It's not everything. A system administrator or a network administrator, I'm sure, would tell you there's a lot of other controls you have to have in place. But this is sort of the base level stuff. And it goes back to those early days of computing when people shared resources, shared a big terminal in a university somewhere. Okay, so my desktop folder is owned by me, Kali, and is also owned by the group Kali. if this group were, say, you know, class or students, then everybody who was part of the class, all the users we added to it, all the students potentially, maybe the, you know, instructors have different permissions. You can have owner and group permissions on every single file and directory on the file system. And remember, each directory to the file system, right, is a file. So if you hear me say file, it also applies to directories. Just assume that. Okay. Now you also have this stuff, these letters in the front here. The D stands for directory in this case. If I create a file, which we will, you'll see there won't be a D there. But then these are the important part we care about right now. RWX, R space X, R space X. Read, write, execute. And then this only has read, execute, and then read, execute. So these are really 3 columns of 3 letters for the 3 sets of permissions you can have on the file system. It's confusing. So I'm going to show you this calculator, and you can go out to this. I'll make sure this is in the homework materials as well, chmod-calculator.com. This sort of breaks it down in a way that I think is more palatable and a little easier for us as, you know, GUI graphical people to really understand. Each one of those columns is owner, then group, then public. Okay, so that's the order of those 3 columns. Then you have read, and you'll see when I check read, it's 400. If I check write, it's 200. If I check execute, it's 100. And then you just add them together to give the permissions. So if we want the owner of the file, Callie in this case, to be able to read the file or directory, they at least have to have 400 permissions. If we want them also to write, which by the way means delete too, then 600, because it's 4 plus 2. If we also have programs, let's say the file itself is a program or it's a folder that has programs in it, then we would give another 100. So it's 4 plus 2 plus 100. Read, write, execute. Same thing for group, right? 400 plus 2 plus 1, 770. Then we get 4 plus 2 plus 1, and you'll see these columns fill in. Okay, so the current permissions on that folder that don't have you know, full permissions, you'll see there's a slash, right, just like here, RX, and that aligns with 755. So the actual permissions on these directories can be used in notation as 755. It's a very geeky thing. It's octal, if anyone cares, 0 through 7, representing those settings. Everything, of course, in the early days of computing would stay in units of 8, and that's why that is sort of the way that you do it. Okay, cool. Now let's actually run some commands and like change things, change these permissions. So the first thing we're going to do is chmod, okay, and that's the command that you're going to use to change permissions on every file/directory. And because these are directories, we have to put -R, that means recursive. That'll act on the directory and everything below it. And then let's change the permission of, I don't know, videos to 400. Okay, so we want read for the owner and then nothing for the group and nothing for the public. So we do 400 space videos, and you can hit tab, just hit capital V, tab. Now, I'm going to clear. When I do ls-l, you'll see just read permission, no other permissions for anyone else. This is basically how early internet and website publishing worked, right? You'd have very basic permissions controlling whether or not people could see things. And it still applies. If you talk to somebody who's a web developer / web designer, if you change the permissions on a folder where sensitive information is stored, you can open that up to the public, right? We could change the permissions of video if I hit the up arrow and I go back here and I just change this to 777 instead of 400 and I hit enter. Now if I clear ls-l, you'll see it's full permissions for everybody on this videos folder. And Callie's really nice because it like highlights that because it's something you should know. Maybe dangerous, maybe not. But if that were like, I don't know, a website folder that had like PDFs with people's, sensitive information, some form they filled out, something like that. People uploading things that are supposed to be, their photos or their passports or something. That would be open to the world, open to a search engine. So that's a very basic thing we need to understand. We're sort of seeing reflected in these operating systems that we're using in this test world, something that applies much more widely. And of course, if you're a hacker, right, it's very useful to be able to know this. You need to know what you can read, what you can't read by default. When you raise your privileges, called privilege escalation, right, then you want to change these permissions, right, so that you can do certain things. If you copy some malware over, you've got to execute it. So you got to make sure it has execute permissions, right, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's a heavy concept, but we'll reiterate it in the homework. And there's a lot of resources out there, chmod calculator being one of them. I also want to talk a little bit about groups and owner, and we're just going to change ownership and group of a folder here real quickly. That command is chown for change owner. So chown space, and again, -R, because we're going to do it on a directory. And let's change the ownership of the pictures folder. So instead of Callie owning it, I'm going to change it to root. And I'm going to put a colon in. I'm going to change the group to root as well. So just the root user. Now, because I'm doing this with the root user, I have to go back. I'm going to put sudo in front of it. I'm sure some of you who have been playing around have realized when you do rootsy things, you got to do that. And you probably get barked at if you don't. Okay. And then so it's root : root space $PI. I hit tab, fills in pictures. I hit enter. Now I have to enter my root password, or my sudo password, I should say. Great, so that worked. Now I clear again, ls-l, and you'll see the owner and the group for the pictures folder is root. Now if I try to cd into pictures and ls, well, we don't have files in here, but let's say I were to touch and create a file called dog.txt. I can't do it. Permission denied, because that folder is no longer owned by me. It's owned by root. Okay, you get the general idea here. This is how you have multiple users on a system. This is actually something that our systems do all the time, especially Mac users are actually doing this in the background. If you're a Mac user, Windows does it a little bit differently, but your My Documents folder might be different than someone else's My Documents folder, and so on the same system. All right, now, one more thing before we go back to Scott here that I want to make sure I do to kind of like hammer things home. I want to activate the root user. By default, the root user is not like an active account to log into on most modern systems like this. And that's because they have sort of a default security, right? So I'm going to do sudo space password, PASSWD. And we did this, I believe, for the homework last time. -L root. That changes the password expiry for the user root so that you can log in as them. Changed. Okay, but the root user, even though it says that, the root user actually doesn't have a password at this point. So then I need to give the root user a password. So I'm going to go sudo password and then root. Hit enter. And let's give it a really crappy password because we're going to crack this later and it's going to be very demonstrative, let's say. I'm just going to use the word password, 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 and you'll see the cursor doesn't move. Just know that it's not going to do that because this is secret information. Cool, password updated successfully. Now I can use the SU command to test that this works, and that will try to make me the root user. SU, enter. Then I go PASSWORD. And bam, I'm the root user. And look, it highlights it red. It's real dangerous. We're in the danger zone. That's basically how that works. When I want to exit as a root user, I can just type the word exit, and it drops me back into Callie. That's basic stuff. We'll put it in the homework if I went a little too quick for you. And back to Scott.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. I am going to go to the command line right now.
You want me to CD up to the root level, I assume,
Yeah,
right?
yes, exactly. And then can you please what I would like to show everyone is that you can get a directory listing from the root. So go ls-a -l space etc. So what we want is the etc.
Got it. Yep.
Okay. So there's a lot of different files in the etc directory. What thing that we care most about, you think, is the file up there called password, because you think, okay, let's go to password. If you can go cat, you maybe cd into etc and then do cat password, just so we can show everyone what's inside the password file.
And see why the file system matters. Okay. Cat just prints out, for you folks, we may not have gone over it much. It just prints out the content of a text file or some other string. So okay. Cat password.
Okay. So what you see here is this looks really confusing, but in fact, if you look on the left hand side, this is a list of all the users on the system. Okay. A lot of the users on the system will not be relevant to us because they're not real users. It's like the computer is treating certain services as users for purposes of convenience. Sean is at the very end on Kali. Now, if you see Kali, there's nothing here that looks anything like a password. So the fact that one thing that we learned is that passwords are not in the password file. Okay, users are in the password file. So if you want to see the users, you would go to the etc /password, and you would see all the users. Now, where are the passwords? Well, they're in a different file called shadow. Okay, so first just type in, Sean, cat shadow.
Yep.
Enter. It won't let me see it. Why? Do ls/-l shadow. I want to show them the permissions. You see over here, for the rest of the world, namely, if you're the root user, you can read and write. If you're part of the root of the shadow group, you can read what's in shadow. But I'm in neither of those, or Sean's in neither of those. And so I can't read it. So what we have to do is we have to sudo into it. This is, Sean's going to go sudo cat shadow and then enter the password. What you see over here at the bottom is that you have the Kali user, and then right after that, you have these $signs, which you can ignore for right now. But then after that, you're going to get what's called the hash. Now, this is not the password. This is the hash of the password. And that is what I'm going to talk about, what hashes are, and we're going to talk about how to crack hashes. So the first thing we need to know is that passwords are not in the password file. Number two, the passwords are not in the shadow file. The passwords are nowhere, okay? Only the hashes of the passwords are there. And I'll repeat that again when I describe how hashes work. We're gonna go back to technology that works. Okay, what is hashing? Okay, so a hash is you take a plain text, something that is meaningful, you put it through a hash function, and it gives you the hash value. Okay, so this is in my demo, that if it would have worked, I was showing you that TOOS has this hash associated with it. Okay, and if you were to change TOOS to TOOR, so TOOS and TOOR are off by just one letter, the hash will be completely different. Okay, so what the hash is it's not just like, but it is in fact a message digest. It's like a summation of the plain text in some obfuscated, garbled form, so that somebody who just knows the hash won't be able, without great difficulty, to figure out what the plain text is. Okay, next page here. Okay. Now the thing about a hash is it's a one-way function. So it's really easy to go from the plain text to the hash. It's really hard to go from the hash to the plain text. So let me give you an example. So here's my phone. When I want to type in my passcode, okay, my iPhone does not know my password or my passcode. So Sean was reminding me of this, like when you go into the Apple store, to the Genius Bar, and they say, "What's your password?" And they were like, "You don't know my password?" And the answer is no, they don't know your password. Your phone doesn't know your password. The only thing your phone knows, that's my cat, is my cat and the hash of my password, which is fine because when I put in my passcode, what my iPhone is doing is it's converting the passcode to a hash and then compares that computed hash to the stored hash in the etc shadow file. And if they match, then I get in. So again, like your devices don't have to know your password as long as they know the hash of your password and are using the hashing function that you used to create it. Okay. Just one quick thing, it's important to know the difference between hashing and encryption. In hashing, you can have multiple plain texts that go to the same hash value. This is what's known as a collision. Okay, it's hard to collide, but you can have collisions because hashing functions are just. I know Sean said there's no octal in this class, but a little math here. Hashing functions are many to one functions, whereas encryption is one to one, meaning there are no collisions for encryption. So if I go Scott as my plain text and I encrypt it, I get a cipher, which if I take the cipher and then I decrypt it, I get Scott back. Okay, so hashing goes one way, encryption goes both ways. Okay. If like hashing works, how can we break passwords? How can we crack them? So there are several ways to do it. We're going to do. I'm going to talk about two ways. We'll do another way next week. There's one that's just brute force. You take the letter A, you see its hash value. You compare it with the shadow hash value. If it's not the same, move on to the next one. AA, get the hash value, compare it. AAA. You can imagine like this is going to get not only monotonous, but it's going to take forever. Okay. So brute force attacks are like you have to be basically the NSA to do it, or what you do is you well, it depends. I mean, if you have a weak password, any of us can crack them using brute force. What we're going to use is what's called a dictionary attack. And what a dictionary attack does is it takes common passwords. It computes the hash of those common passwords, generally from like a password breach or something like that. And then it compares it to the hash that is stored in the etc shadow file. So if you take the word password, compute the hash, because lots of people use the word password as their password. If the hash of password equals the hash in the etc shadow file, we'll know that the password is password. Okay, and so that's what Sean is going to show us how to do. First, how to create a hash, and then how to crack hashes using John the Ripper. So I'm going to switch over to you, Sean.
Great. So let's get started. Let's get cracking. I get to say that a few times in this class, probably. Okay, cool. So I'm back in Cali here. I'm going to clear my screen, make sure I keep things nice and neat for you all. Thank you for the feedback. It's really important to make sure that you all can see what we're actually doing. Speaking of, okay, beautiful. So just a quick representation here graphically. Maybe it'll help, maybe it won't. But the idea is if you change one little letter, right, in this sentence, the red fox jumps over the blue dog, and you run it through one of these cryptographic hash functions, you get a completely different output. So a small minor change of just one bit in these files, right, or whatever the input is, expressed, of course, in bits, then you will end up with different cryptographic output. So these hashes are used all the time for verification. We'll get into that when we talk about supply chain. What we care about right now is being an attacker, right? And as Scott said, when you actually store these on a system, hopefully safe from an attacker, when you store passwords on a system, you might have something like this, where the password's Amanda, and here's the hash, or the password's baseball, and here's the hash. This is a list of really weak and common passwords. I'm going to upload 3 of them to the GitHub, shorter lists, and then some larger lists. And then if you choose to do this as part of your hack this semester, I guess we're calling it, throughout the course, then you can also go out on the internet and find lists. Like I said before with like keyloggers a couple weeks ago, it's not hard to just look up common password hashes decrypted, and you get like all the common passwords. Obviously 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on are there, but there's also stuff you might not expect, like Yankees, Mustang. This actually has some swears, so I'm going to close that window. But I also have sanitized versions I'm uploading, so hopefully, you can use them safe for work. And on the Kali Linux distribution, we have some built-in tools to do all of this, which is very cool, and that's one of the reasons we have you using it. John the Ripper has files, and I'm going to just browse there in the graphical interface and then go in the terminal, because when I explained this to my wife earlier today, she said this helped, so hopefully it actually does. I think it will. If I go into the folder user share word lists in the file system, you'll see there's a bunch of word lists in here. John.lst is the one we'll use today. There's also this one called rocku.txt. That's a really frequently updated word list or hash list that has the most common passwords, and that's updated from breaches. So like if there's a breach of some big site, a lot of them, for example, came from Ashley Madison when that breach happened, then it will end up in this rocku list. And again, I will make sure I paste all of this stuff into the Git, but you can look for it yourself and find the rocku list, the most updated versions out on the internet. If you choose to do this with your as a component of your project at the end of the semester here. Okay, let's actually get into it. So I'm in my desktop folder. As Scott said, there are these 2 special files in .etc, etc, or etc. And those files are etc/password, which, as we found out, does not actually have passwords in it. It just has a list of users and some other information about the users. And then there's etc shadow. And the shadow file actually is important. It has hashes of those passwords. So we need to run a command, and you can start following along if you're in Kali at this point. Sudo space unshadow. You can probably guess what that does. It unmasks the shadow file, /etc/passw. And again, between all of these, make sure you're putting a space, so sudo space unshadow space /etc/passwd space /etc/shadow. So this is going to combine basically both of those files into a format that allows us to more easily crack it with a dictionary attack. Then we're going to take that and we're going to send that output. And this is something we'll go over in the homework this week. Space and then a forward bracket or arrow, a caret. I don't know what you want to call it. It's down near the last row of your letters in your keyboard usually. Yeah, that will send the output of that command to a file in this case. Unshadow.txt is what I'm calling mine. I hit enter. And you'll see, and graphical environment is great to use alongside it, so you can kind of like verify, but also I could just do ls here, and you'll see unshadow.txt, unshadow.txt. Now, if we look at this file, we'll see it looks familiar. It looks like the password file combined with the shadow file, and it has that hash in there that we are going to crack. The Kali user is the only user we care about in this context. We obviously also care about the root user, which we just enabled. So the root user should be in here as well. Yeah, all the way at the top, you'll see root. Okay. So now I'm going to clear. And then we're going to use this utility called John the Ripper to do the dictionary attack. So it's going to basically do a brute force, but with some extra information. And that information is coming from that word list. That's why it's called a dictionary attack. So sudo space John space -- format equals crypt. That's the default format for these passwords on a system like this. Is actually something called yes crypt if you want to look into it. Then -- word list equals /, and this is going to be that directory that I just showed you in the file system, right? User share word lists. Okay, so we do /user /share /word lists /. Now, which file are we going to use? Well, again, we can go back and we can look in the graphical view. That might be a little easier for you. John.lst. So I type here john.lst. Okay, now space. So we've got our sudo that gives us the root privileges for running this one command. Okay, then we're running the utility called John the Ripper, which is just called John. Then we're telling it that this file is encrypted, or the hashes we want to break are encrypted with something called yescrypt. Then we say, hey, we want to use this word list to do a dictionary attack. Here's where the word list is. Then we say, hey, we want to do it to this file. And this is unshadow.txt, which is the file that I just created on my desktop. For you, it might be somewhere else, but probably in the folder you're in, hopefully. All right, now I'm going to hit enter, and here's where the magic happens. Bam! Nice and easy, really, really quick, right? Because we have a crappy password for root. So you'll see password, root, okay? Now let's set the root password to something more complex. Let's do sudo password, passwd space root. And now I'm going to set the password to Kali. And Kali. I'm going to clear. I'm going to use that up arrow, that history, so I don't have to retype all that stuff. And I'm going to hit enter. What are you doing to me? No password hash is left to crack because it already did it. Okay. How do I clear the John history? Hold on. Let's try one more time. These show that sometimes we get errors here when we're doing stuff. I'm going to add a user, and that user is going to be called Scott. Do sudo space add user Scott, and this was in the homework. Now I'm going to give Scott the password of Kali. Kali. I'm going to skip all this directory stuff. Just say the information's correct. Great. Now I clear. Let's go back and try cracking again, and let's see if we get Scott's password. It gave us an error before because we already cracked the other stuff. It actually adds it to like a history. I'll come up. Did I not do? I got to run the unshadow command again because I just created that new user. Yeah, so we'll let this go. This will probably take another like 40 seconds here, and we'll get the cracking going, hopefully. Fingers crossed. But the general idea here is you're taking known hashes, right? Known broken stuff, known weak passwords, and you're basically just running an attack against passwords on this system. We had a student one time do this with, I don't even know. There we go. Beautiful. And I actually did get it for root that time. Weird. Okay. So Callie, root, Callie, Scott. Cool. That's actually not weird. That's because I didn't run unshadow before. That's why I got the error. At any rate, you get the point. You can do this on any system that you break into or your own system, hopefully. But as we said, this can be part of your hacks. And, we had somebody run, I think for days, John the Ripper, with a huge word list, cracking passwords. So, yeah, it's real stuff and it's pretty powerful. So
yeah, actually, so that one of the homeworks is going to be to crack a hash. Is it?
Yes, it is. And then next week, I should say, we're going to do something that's a little more complex, building on this. We wanted to do it this week, but it was too much to shove in. We're going to do something called use something called rainbow tables, and we'll talk about like more complex ways that administrators try to protect passwords, and therefore more complex ways that hackers try to break those passwords. This is pretty basic stuff. It's still really powerful, but obviously folks have tried to figure out both better ways to defend and better ways to break this sort of thing. So.
Right. Yeah, great. No, so this is really kind of the first thing that we're all going to be doing together that is, hackery. So it's kind of, and I have to just say, I mean, I didn't want things to go wrong, so I asked if Sean could do it, but I normally like doing it in the class because I just really like cracking passwords. It's just really fun. And yes, I was the one that ran John the Ripper for days. And I have an account on the supercomputer here. I just really like cracking passwords. Anyway, so thank you. And we're charging full steam ahead, and we look forward to seeing you next week.